The Bible study, we went through what I call a tale of two seas. You know, the old book, A Tale of Two Cities. Well, it was a tale of two seas. And in the main message this afternoon, I'd like to look at some lessons we can learn from those two seas, because we can indeed learn from those two seas. The Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level. The area around is about 700 feet below sea level. You would think that that's pretty low, but it's nowhere near the Dead Sea, which the surface of the Dead Sea is 1,302 feet below sea level. I always think of that, and I think of the old Scottish number, you take the high road and I'll take the low road. And I'll be in Scotland afar ye. Well, I don't know about if the high road would be the Sea of Galilee, but certainly the low road would be the Dead Sea. So what's the difference between them? The Sea of Galilee is fed by the Jordan River. Now, everyone thinks of the Jordan River and they think of it only as being from the southern edge of the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, but it actually begins way up above the Sea of Galilee, and it feeds the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee is both fed by and drained by the Jordan River. The Dead Sea, on the other hand, is fed by the Jordan River and some other wadis that flow into it, but it does not give off any water. That's why it has attained the salt content that it has, simply because it always is bringing in but never letting out. The Dead Sea has no drainage. In other words, that chief difference between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee is that the Sea of Galilee both takes and gives, whereas the Dead Sea only takes. So the question I had for myself is, am I a Sea of Galilee person or am I a Dead Sea person? And I think that's a valid question. Which one am I? Turn to Galatians, the 5th chapter. Galatians chapter 5. If you look at the difference between the two, it's the difference between two words that both begin with self. The Sea of Galilee would be, if I'm likening it to myself and what kind of person am I want to be like the Sea of Galilee and be selfless. In other words, I don't care about the self that much. If I am a Dead Sea person, I am selfish. Selfless or selfish. Galatians chapter 5, we'll begin reading in verse 13. Galatians 5, verse 13. For brethren, you have been called unto liberty, unto freedom. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. When you serve one another, you quit worrying about yourself and you are concerned about someone else's well-being. It goes on to say, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, or one sentence, if you will. Even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of another. In other words, if people start backbiting, having conflict, then they have to be careful, because they will actually begin to consume one another through their actions, through their deeds. Now, I'm not going to turn back and read all of Revelation chapter 18, but you might note it and go back and look at it. It is talking about the Babylon that is out there right now and is coming about. And if you read verses 1 through 14, you see a city, you see a people that are consumed with self-interest. And boy, is it just me, or does it seem like that's becoming the way it is in today's world? I read a book recently, the title of it is Last Stands. Last Stands. I give you the author, but I just now have thought about it and I can't remember. But if you look up Last Stands, you'll find it very interesting. It says, why men fight when there is no hope of survival. And he talks about various various last stands, everything from the Alamo to Masada to different last stands in Europe and around like that in the great Grecian days and later the Roman days. But he makes a statement in there that if you do not have anything you would die for, then you have nothing to live for. And I find that an interesting way of looking at it. If I am willing to die for something, to give my life for something, then that gives me a reason to live to the point that I would possibly need to do that. If you have nothing you would die for, and he says that basically that's where we are in today's world, very few people have anything that they would die for. And if you have nothing you would die for, then you have nothing you would live for. There's nothing to live for. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. As soon as I say 1 Corinthians chapter 13, you think of the love chapter. And if you read verses 4 through 8, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, Paul says to the church at Corinth, love suffers long and is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love vaunts not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not its own, is not easily provoked, thinks no evil, rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Love never fails. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. You know, if you think of love and you say, what is the opposite of love? You would be talking about what selfishness is. You know, selfishness behaves itself unseemly. I noticed that on the way here, by the way. Not to services, but yesterday driving on Interstate 30 between Little Rock and Texarkana. There was a car that burnt up along the road right at the road construction work in the westbound lanes. I moved about a mile in 30 minutes. Now you quit saying how many miles per hour did you move? That's not very much. And it took me over an hour to go through. You know what you really notice when there's that kind of traffic jam? You start noticing human nature. Wow. People come through. They have a sign because of the road construction work. It begins 2 miles back and it says, right lane ends, merge left. So what does everybody do? As many as they can pile in there on those 2 miles, they're going to say, I'm going to get to the front because I need to get through, because what I'm going toward is much more important than anything that anybody else is going toward. And I just sat there and shook my head because I knew that all that does, what does that do? When you throw everything into a funnel, it just backs up everything, and it made it worse and worse. So I just sat there and listened to my radio, and I tried to keep my temper. And I will tell you that Ken Tate is not real good in those situations. You know, it says confess your faults one to another. That's a fault of mine. Because I didn't do that, but I also thought, well, I'm a lot better person than they are. Because I didn't do that. But then inside, I'm turning to steam. And I'm understanding why that car burnt up near the beginning of all this, because they turned to steam and the car went like that. The opposite of love is selfishness. The opposite of love is that selfishness, instead of desiring things for other people, it is always desiring its own things. 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3, looking at this idea of what human nature is. 2 Timothy chapter 3, Verse 1, Paul writing to the evangelist Timothy, the man who was like a son to Paul, and this was the last book that Paul wrote to him and probably to anyone. It was given just before his martyrdom. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 1 says, "Don't you know that in the last days perilous times shall come? Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God." And he goes on to say, having a form of godliness, they may try to pass themselves off as spiritual or godly. They deny the power thereof. From such, he said, turn away. Why? Because these people are the epitome of selfishness. We are living in selfish times nowadays. Unfortunately, we are. I have a handout back in the back that you're welcome to pick up a copy of. It's a handout on the book, The Healing Power of Doing Good. The subtitle is The Health and Spiritual Benefits of Helping Others. The book was written by Alan Lukes and Peggy Payne. And the book is replete with examples of people helping people, and they are better off for having helped them. I'll read just a little bit off the jacket. It says that the healing power of doing good reaffirms and explains that when we care for others, we're actually caring for ourselves. It is an important book for those suffering from chronic health problems, as well as the health conscious, anyone interested in how our mind affects our body, and people in the helping professions. And it reminds us that there never has been such a need for caring as there is today, because we are a society in which we have kind of quit caring for other people. There was one review that I picked up off the internet for this book, and this person wrote, "We are given personal accounts of people who have benefited from volunteering. A full 95% of those report a physical feel-good reaction. Many of those volunteers have themselves suffered from depression or poor health, and their lives have been transformed by helping. Helping others strengthens the immune system, decreases the intensity and awareness of physical pain, activates emotions essential for maintaining good health, reduces the incidence of negative attitudes that harm the body, and finally provides multiple benefits to the body through stress relief." They end saying, the author feels that regular volunteering, if introduced to the United States school system, I want to read that again, regular volunteering, if it would be introduced to the United States school system, would reduce violence and transform the country. Why? Because if you teach children that it is more blessed to give than to receive, then it makes everything better. It makes everybody better off for having done it. It's a book worth reading. It really is. If you get the chance, you might pick up a copy of it and give it a read, because I really enjoyed the book. So the question is, how do we become more like the Sea of Galilee and less like the Dead Sea? I'd like to look at 4 basic points today, in the time that remains, of things to focus on, areas to focus on in thinking both of receiving, because listen, you know, the command says to love your neighbor as yourself. You ever notice that? You cannot love other people until you understand true, right love for yourself. Then you can love other people. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 16, you probably read it somewhere around the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but I'll repeat it, you don't have to turn there, that at the command to give offerings in the 3 great seasons of the year, it says, every person shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. There's an old hymn called Count Your Many Blessings. When we count our many blessings, then we understand how we can bless other people. The first area I would like to think about is our relationship with those who are outside the body of Christ, outside the church itself. 1 Timothy chapter 3. We were in 2 Timothy. Let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. And I always note this because it has to do with being a minister. Being a minister means to be a servant, to be a bondslave. It means going the distance, if you will. It says in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, this is a true saying. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. It's work to do that. And then it goes on and talks about the various things that you should look upon in order to evaluate if someone is already ministering, by the way, not that they are ready to become a minister, but they are already ministering. Down to verse 7, though. Verse 6 says they should not be a novice, lest being lifted up with pride is a part of selfishness, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are outside. A good report of those that are outside. I really admire what Mr. Haver does in this area because he does as good a job as I think he can in presenting the church to those who are outside these walls as being something that is there to help. Not there to be helped, but there to help other people. He must have a good report of them which are outside, without, lest he fall into the reproach and snare of the devil. We need to have a good relationship. Yes, it does say that we should give primarily, and first it says that we need to be giving to those within the body, but also those that are outside the body, serving and helping them. We butchered a steer here a while back, and we had a lot of hamburger. And I helped another neighbor who also butchered, and he had a lot of hamburger. And we decided that together we were going to go up and down our road. We live on a dirt road. When I laughingly said that we were in the suburbs of Omaha, Arkansas, I mean, the way you get to our house is you take the U.S. highway to the state highway to the county dirt road, stay right at the first fork, and we're the third place on the left. And so we went up and down our road with free coolers full of frozen hamburger and offering it particularly to people who just simply needed that. I don't say that to self-aggrandize. I'm just saying that as a point. There are people out there who need help. I'm sure a lot of you have looked at the price of hamburger over the past, a year or so. It has gone up and up and up. Some of those folks could not afford to buy hamburger meat. And we had much more than we could possibly think of using, even with my extended family. And so, you know, the people look at you funny if you go up to their house and you say, we've got some frozen hamburger meat. Would you like some? They're not really sure, you know. You put razor blades in this? You put a little bit of poison in it or something like that? And I said, no, it just came from the butcher. It's still frozen. You're welcome to it. Well, I guess I could take a pack. Well, what about 8? What about 10? And we gave away, I think that day my neighbor and I gave away about 70 or 80 pounds of hamburger meat up and down that road. And people are shocked when you do that, brethren. You do that and you're always doing as much for yourself as you're doing it for them, because you're learning a valuable lesson, and that is to be the Sea of Galilee and not the Dead Sea. Don't always receive and never give out. It's something we can all do. So our relationship with those outside the church. What about our relationship with our own brethren? Point number 2, in areas to focus on when thinking of both receiving and giving, and also the Sea of Galilee as opposed to the Dead Sea. Our relationship with our brethren. Do we, even in these times of social distancing, some people have really liked social distancing because they really were not happy to be fully embracing one another. And I think that's why I believe that masks have held on the way they have. My wife, Janice, told me that some people would give up their mask kicking and screaming, that they would not give up their mask. And if you think of a mask, and I'm not condemning anyone who's using a mask, because there are physical and there are reasons to wear one. But I'm telling you that what does a mask do? Can you tell? I'm sorry, can you tell? I can't do that with it like that. Can you tell if I'm smiling or grimacing when I do this? You cannot read a face when it's masked. And there are some people who mask their faces even without a mask. They really are. My wife tells me that I am an open book because whatever I'm going through, I show it in my face. I guess we're all that way to one extent or another. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 1. We're right here near 2 Timothy. Let's turn back to 2 Timothy chapter 1. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3. Paul says, I thank God, whom I serve from my forefathers with pure conscience, that without ceasing I have remembrance of you in my prayers night and day. That's some way that we can be giving all the time, praying for people. We have in our area, I know you all have a prayer circle that goes through your bulletins and such like that. We have a text prayer line that if someone sends me a prayer request, I send it out, and it goes to somewhere around, I think it's 40 or 50 different people who then can pass it along to others, and it's like a web that goes out like that. The more people that you have praying about something, I believe there's power in prayer. I really do. And we should be praying for one another. I had someone one time who asked to be taken off our prayer line, someone who was not in our congregation, but they asked to be taken off our prayer line, and the reason was because this person said that, I'll say he or she, so you don't know if it's a he or she did not know any of the people we were asking for prayers for. And my point was, who cares if you know them or not? Can you not still pray for them knowing their circumstances? Of course we can. We can build bonds of friendship and love. When you pray for someone, they know it. They know it. And then you talk to them about their circumstance. Find out how it's gone since they were asking for prayers and so on. It builds bonds of friendship and love. How much of your prayers, how much of my prayers focus on other people? Or do I just want, like the old song, "Oh Lord, won't you give me a Mercedes Benz?" Janis Joplin, by the way, if y'all wonder, she ended up dead of drugs and drinking, so it's not a person I would cite as a good source. But her song was, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? My friends all got Porsches, I must make amends." Well, if all I'm worried about is a Mercedes Benz and not worried about my brethren, and believe it or not, all those people out there are our brethren, because it says in one of the genealogies of Jesus of Nazareth that this was the son of that, this was the son of that, this was the son of that, who was the son of Adam, who was the son of God, which means that we are all brothers and sisters. So when we pray for others, we are praying for our brothers and our sisters, even if we don't know them. They are our brethren ultimately. John chapter 13. John chapter 13. Am I a Sea of Galilee that takes in? I have to take in order to give out. That's part of it. Yes, I have to take in order to give out. Or am I the Dead Sea who's constantly bringing in and never giving out? John chapter 13, verse 34. John 13:34. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. He repeats almost the same thing in John 15, verses 12 and 13, only in that place, if you just flip over there, John chapter 15, verse 12, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." And he goes on to say, "Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Now, you can step in front of the speeding automobile and push that person out of the way. And that's loving, and that's giving your life, because you be the one get hit, over them. You can step in front of a bullet, or you can give your life minute by minute, day by day, by helping other people through their darkest hours. You know, there are people who are dead seas out there. And dead seas can be healed. Remember, we read it in Ezekiel, and we read it in Zechariah. Dead seas can be healed. Can the waters that flow out of you heal a person who is a dead sea? I hope so, as I hope I can. The third area that we can examine is our relationship within our own families, especially within our own marriages. 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. I really got slapped by this, I'll be honest with you. 1 Peter chapter 3. Because it said something about my relationship with my wife. Now, some of you may have lost a husband or wife. I understand that. There's still things that we can learn from this as well. But to those of you who out there have a spouse still living, never forget this. 1 Peter chapter 3, and it's directed in verse 7 specifically to husbands, but I dare say it's also good for wives to read it as well. It says, "Likewise, husbands, dwell with your wives, according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered." That your prayers be not hindered. And I realized that there were times when I was just being kind of crotchety toward my wife. And when I was being crotchety toward my wife, I was getting in my own way. I was getting in my own way of my own prayers. I would wonder in those times why it felt like a prayer sometimes went up to the ceiling and bounced right back off. I fixed my relationship with my wife, and that helped me fix my relationship with my Father in heaven, because my prayers were no longer hindered. Honest with you there. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. The other part of this is that I know in years past that we tended to read all of these scriptures about wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, and things like that. That's important. That's part of the Word of God. It does say that. But it also says in chapter 5 and verse 21. Ephesians 5:21. Submit yourselves one to another in the fear of God. And I dare say within these walls, over the internet, people who are out listening to this right now within other congregations and other places, that we should all submit ourselves as brothers and sisters one to another, and maybe we'll live a little bit better together as well. But specifically, as wives and husbands, what does it say to husbands? Let's drop down. Drop down to verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loves his wife loves himself. When you love other people, then the love always returns to good for you as well. Whether you call that paying it forward, that's the popular phrase nowadays. You have someone help you, and so you help someone else, and you call that paying it forward, or whether it's just a matter of helping someone within your own household. Love begets love. Always has and always will. So our relationship with those outside the church, our relationship with our own brethren, our relationship within our own families, specifically our marriage. The fourth area is our relationship with our Father in heaven. With our Father in heaven. Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. It says, therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Pay attention, Ken. You need to pay attention to what he said. When he says it once, listen to it. When he says it twice, really listen to it. When he says it 3 and more times, you better really grab a hold of it. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation? I have known people who have neglected so great salvation, and I am so sorry that they have. And if I was in any way responsible for them neglecting that, I pray that God in heaven forgives me of it. You remember it says of Lot's wife that she turned around and she looked backward, and she turned into a statue of salt, a column of salt. Luke chapter 17, let's turn there. Luke chapter 17, it says, everyone talks about the shortest verse in the Bible. Everybody knows that that's Jesus wept, right? Well, Luke chapter 17 has the next shortest version in the Bible, and it's 3 words. Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. Remember Lot's wife. It says in Luke 9, verse 62, that those who put their hand to the plow and look back are not fit for the kingdom. Lot's wife. There's part of me that says Lot's wife has gotten a bit of a bad shake. Yes, she did. Can you imagine what it was like to leave behind? It says that they left behind sons-in-law. So you know what that meant? They left behind daughters. They probably left behind grandchildren. I have daughters and I have grandchildren. I can't imagine what it would be like to be led out of a place and know that behind me were the screaming deaths of my daughters, my sons-in-law, and my grandchildren. So I try not to judge Lot's wife too harshly. But the fact is, she did turn and look back after being warned not to do it. Remember Lot's wife, because looking back means that you're not looking forward. Back in my early days, I actually did a little bit of plowing with a horse. And you know the one thing that you cannot do if you're plowing with a horse? Look back. Because as soon as you look back, you see your plow lines go like that. To keep the straight and narrow, you have to always have your focus looking forward. Our relationship with our Father in heaven is, in one regard, that give, or I should that take and that give. He gives to us. He is the giver of every good and perfect gift. It says so in the book of James. But we are to take those gifts and we are to share them. We are to pay them forward as a part of learning to live like a Sea of Galilee. And never forget, in your hardest days, in the days when you are lower than the Sea of Galilee, when you've had a terrible tragedy in your home or whatever, that the Sea of Galilee feeds the Dead Sea, and someday there will be a river, feeding the Dead Sea that will heal it. And if you will turn to the Maker of the river of life, you can be healed now. And maybe through your actions, there's a Dead Sea person out there who can be healed as well. Carry the water that is living, that is from your Father in heaven to other people, and slake their thirst, because the world is filled with people who are thirsting. Am I a Sea of Galilee type person, or do I take the low road? Do I receive blessings and then pay them forward, or like the Dead Sea, do I selfishly always take in and never give out? When we were called into the knowledge of the truth, we were largely like the Dead Sea, always concerned with what we might get, always concerned with ourselves selfishly and not what we might give. Today, we should become and concern ourselves with being more like the Sea of Galilee and less like the Dead Sea. Be the sea that receives and gives, and the sea that is teeming with life and love.